Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to Rainbow Cartoons. This is a viewer's advisory for tweens and teens. My name is Rebecca Oxley. My pronouns are she and they. I am the librarian 3 at the Greenbelt branch, and I have gotten very passionately into readers advisory and viewers advisory for LGBTQ plus youth, particularly because I've had the wonderful experience of working with the LGBTQ plus working team here at Prince George's County, which is led by the courageous Teresa Miller. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Teresa. I'm a librarian here with the library system. And yeah, I also, like Rebecca mentioned, I lead the LGBTQ plus working group. So we take the lead on a lot of our programming for Pride Month and other LGBTQ plus programs throughout the year. And we also help build up a positive staff culture. So for me, LGBTQ plus themes in media are important to me because I mean they've been part of like my own experience as a member of that community and like figuring out my identity. It was Buffy the Vampire Slayer is the show that made me realize I was bi. So yeah, like with queer cartoons especially, that's been a really cool part of just kind of like celebrating that identity and affirming it. I think cartoons especially speak to me like that because they're just pure and fun LGBTQ plus experiences. There's no like trauma to work through around it. It's just especially with kids shows specifically, it's just a good time and it's a celebration of who people are. So it's just nice to engage with that.
Nice. Thank you, Teresa. Maria, can you say hi?
Hi, my name is Ruya. My pronouns are she and her. I am a library associate at the New Carrollton Branch Library. And I got into LGBTQ media because I'm a member of the LGBT community. I'm, any kind of media book or TV show that's got good representation has always kind of been on my radar. Either I'm watching it or I'm like, oh, I really need to watch that or read that. And starting also with Buffy. And I wasn't really into animated shows as an adult until I started watching Steven Universe because I heard there was really good representation in that. And I absolutely fell in love. So that's my story.
Thank you. Just for the record,
I forgot to mention my pronoun. They're on my my little name card at the bottom of the screen, but I don't know if that shows up in the recording. So my pronouns are she, her.
thanks, Teresa. I just want to date myself voluntarily and just go on the record as saying that probably for me, my bisexual awakening was Fern Gully, which is an animated movie from the late 80s. I was just like, oh, I like her. Also, I want to be her. And I like him. I think I like everybody. So just to go ahead and lead off this conversation, there has been a recent surge in LGBTQ plus representation in animated media. I think it's important to discuss why that's meaningful, particularly for young people. And in the previous generations of cartoons, there's historically been pretty much an absence of queer content, although there are little surprises, here and there. So, but we want everybody to know that these cartoons they're for everybody. They're not just for queer people. They're for allies and people who are just curious to know more. So for me, I think about older cartoons since I am from a little bit of an older generation. And thinking about how the past has been littered with ambiguously gay cartoon icons. In Charlie Brown, we had Peppermint Patty. She's definitely coded lesbian. Bugs Bunny is a huge one that comes to mind, who's been basically representing queer culture for decades. In fact, I recently read that Chuck Jones actually confirmed that Bugs defies gender, so essentially is kind of trans or non-binary. And that also when they're dressed up as a woman, they're a woman. And when they're dressed up as a man, they're a man. So I thought that was particularly brave for that generation. And then, of course, there's people like Mr. Smithers, who is very ambiguously gay in the television show The Simpsons, which I think is a really important nod, particularly for the fact that The Simpsons is not just the longest running animated show out there, it is the longest running syndicated television show, period. So it's more than just a cartoon. It really has been like a cultural mainstay and kind of litmus as for how things are going. So to have characters that were mostly out, I think was really important. It helps to normalize and witness queer identities. And I think that for young audiences, it certainly promotes self-discovery. Teresa, could you comment on that?
Yeah, for me, I grew up in, the mid 90s, early 2000s. So still at that point, not much in the way of LGBTQ plus representation. So there was a lot of like, I've kind of gone back and made up some queer icons. I don't know if they're made up or if it's actually coded in there, but like for me, Miss Frizzle is always going to be a queer icon. Just the fact that she's voiced by Lily Tomlin, and then in the reboot, her it's not the same character. It's or not predecessor, the next one in along the generations, like her niece or someone. But she's voiced by Kate McKinnon, so it's like this lesbian legacy a little bit. But one thing that's cool is that more recently, a lot of those shows that my generation grew up with, they've kind of brought queer culture in now that it's more acceptable. So like in Arthur, Mr. Ratburn had a wedding episode in 2019, and they had tried to have a little bit of representation back in 2005. There was an episode with a lesbian couple in the background, and there was huge pushback. They pulled the episode so that they're able to go back now and actually have that be like a featured episode with a gay wedding is significant. And then was it last year? Yeah, last year. The Nickelodeon said that SpongeBob is part of the queer community. They didn't specify what, but the creators had said that SpongeBob is ace, which is, we always need ace representation. So yeah, it's cool to see that grow even in shows that weren't able to originally be overt about that.
Maria, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of when I was going kind of way back to my childhood. I was always kind of drawn to like strong relationships between female characters in cartoons. And the one that really comes to mind is the one from Impossible between Kim and Shigo. They're sort of they're nemesis, but like Shigo is like really pretty and she has like this like really strong character design. And I think a lot of baby gays like myself at the time were really drawn to her because of that really strong character design and how like badass and like evil she is. And there's actually an episode where she and Kim, she like, I don't even remember, but she gets like a makeover, and she's like good for an episode, and she and Kim are best friends, and it's like very, I wouldn't say it's explicitly queer coded, but like for somebody who's desperate for queer representation, it definitely felt that way.
Yeah, for sure. there's been so many great cartoons that just have things that are coded, and it's really liberating and exciting to see characters that are just obviously queer or obviously part of the community in some way. So I thought it'd be nice to talk about any recent favorites we might have had, maybe recommend a series, let us know what's notably queer about it, or if there was any media backlash. So the one I was going to talk about was something I actually watched during the pandemic, which was Avatar: Legend of Korra. And I was delighted to see that the series finale paired off Asami and Korra. They just was like, oh, they're holding hands and walking into the sunset together. The co-creator Brian Konietzko approached Nickelodeon with a plan to show a queer relationship, but unfortunately Nickelodeon walked that back to this coded scene. Although, you know, Nickelodeon has said, you know, oh, we're supportive, but really not. And to me, that's kind of a hint to bi erasure. Being bisexual myself, I'm very familiar with the concept of bi erasure, where people don't see you, or you are assumed to be straight because you're presenting as straight, or you're assumed to be gay because you have same-sex attraction. But both characters in Legend of Korra spend much of the series with male love interests. They're sort of, you know, kind of caught up with the same guy at different times. And I think that there's a misconception that queer stories aren't marketable. And then comparing that to like the explosion of fan fiction, and that Netflix, you know, later picked this up and really outed the couple, was very explicit about the relationship between them. So, and I haven't read the comics, which we have here in the library, the Legend of Korra comics. So I'm not really sure if those relationships are further explored. I'd love to know more about that.
They are. I haven't read them either, but my boyfriend is a big fan of the series. And I've read some other people's opinions about them too. So they're very explicit in the comics about Korra and Asami. They even talk a little bit about like the Fire Nation's history of homophobia that came in with the imperialism. And then other novelizations that belong to the same series and universe are also have a lot of queer content. I haven't read any of the like original cast comics from the first series, but they're tagged as LGBTQ. So there should be something. And then also in the novels about the what's her name? The one of the previous avatars, Kyoshi. She's explicitly bisexual, which is nice.
Oh, very nice.
I do want to say that I feel like the last season of Legend of Korra is like a really good example of subtle queer coding, where it's like the LGBT audience picks up on it, but the cishet audience doesn't necessarily. Because I think while it was airing, there were like a lot of moments where you kind of watch like Korra spends a lot of time away from everybody, and the only person she writes to is Asami, and it's like before that it didn't seem like they were like that close, and then like Asami compliments Korra's hair and she blushes, and it's like there are like these little tiny moments where like as like a member of the LGBT community, you're watching this and you're like, am I crazy? Or like, is there like something there? Where I think they would just go completely unnoticed by somebody who wasn't like trained to look for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tracy, do you have a recommendation for, you know, like a recent favorite series?
Yeah, I've been really enjoying OKKO, Let's Be Heroes. It's not airing anymore. It's from Cartoon Network. Right now it's on HBO Max, but it's it's a good time. I'd say the target audience is around like probably like 10-year-olds, but absolutely enjoyable for teens and tweens too. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So it's about a kid whose name is KO, and he lives in this superhero universe, but like everybody has powers, so it's just kind of like a casual, normal thing. And he works at a superhero shopping center with a couple of teenagers who are his best friends, Enid and Radicles. And then they like have adventures fighting through like the dungeon stock room in the back, or there's like a villain that lives across the street and they have to fight his robots and stuff. So as far as what is queer about it, Enid, one of his coworkers, who's like one of the main trio, she is bisexual. And about halfway through the first season, she starts a long-term relationship with another woman that like carries on through the rest of the show. And then the creators have also confirmed a lot of the characters are queer. Some of it's on screen, some of it's not as overt, but the villain across the street is in a long-term partnership, and the creators have said that he's pan. And then the other coworker at this shopping center, Radicles, the creators have said that they're fluid. And then we've got like some background characters that are like a gay couple or some gender nonconforming characters.
Wow, that sounds really, really great. It's really nice to see that represents so much different types of representation, because it's important to remember that LGBTQ plus people, like most marginalized groups, are not a monolith. Everybody is very different. Everyone's individuals. There's a lot of intersectionality there. Ria, did you have a favorite series you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so probably one, if not the most iconic animated series of our time, Adventure Time, which is this super weird show about Finn the human and his brother slash best friend Jake the magical dog, and their adventures trying to be heroes in this magical world. It goes on for like 10 seasons. It's hard even to say what it's about because it's about so many different things. But the queer representation in it is Princess Bubblegum, who is the ruler of the Candy Kingdom, and Marceline, the vampire queen. They early on, there's like this tension between them where they're kind of it seems like they have like some kind of unspoken conflict, and they kind of nag at each other a little bit, and it's confirmed that they're ex-girlfriends. They're both immortal, so they've known each other for like 1,000 years, and at some point in that 1,000 years they dated and they broke up, and like it's confirmed off screen, but there are like a lot of hints, like Bubblegum has this shirt of Marceline's that she's like really attached to, and like she likes to smell it, and they eventually reconcile on screen, and although it's like their relationship grows and it's clear that they really care about each other, but there's nothing like explicitly romantic until the finale, when Bubblegum, it seems like she dies, but she's actually okay, and Marceline is so relieved that they share a kiss, and it was really exciting. Maybe the first, maybe Steven Universe has the first on-screen gay kiss in a queer show, in an animated show, but it was definitely like groundbreaking still. And it's really thanks to a couple of people. So Rebecca Sugar was one of the animators and writers for that show. She is also the show for Steven Universe, and she's kind of a force in LGBT animation. And Hannah K. Nystrom was the storyboard artist for the scene in the finale. And she was like, it's been so long. Like Adventure Time went on for 10 seasons. And like there's been so much and so many hints at Bubblegum and Marceline's relationship. Like, we really need this to be a kiss. So she designed the storyboard for the kiss, and then next to the kiss, she wrote "please" or no, she wrote "come on." The executive producer, and the executive producer was like, "Well, I mean, I can't say no to that." And the it was extremely controversial, the finale, but even like the first episode where you start to guess that they're ex-girlfriends, Adventure Time aired on YouTube as well as TV, and the first episode, What Was Missing, the first queer coded episode, it was removed from YouTube airing because it was so controversial, although it still aired in reruns on TV. But in the graphic novels, like Legend of Korra, there's a graphic novel continuation of the series. There's a lot more explicitly romance. There's a lot more explicit romance between Bubblegum and Marceline.
I am a Bubbling stan all the way. I remember watching that for the first time and I was just like, oh my God, yes, finally it happened. And for anybody who's interested, there is so much wholesome, sweet fan art of Bubbling for anybody who wants to check it out. All right. I think that it would be silly for us not to talk about like our most favorite queer TV show animated for teens. So I'm going to touch back on what Rhea had brought up about the fabulous Rebecca Sugar, who is non-binary and is now legendary in the animation world, and her series, Steven Universe. So for anybody who has been living under a rock, Steven is half human, half gem. His mother is gone. His dad is around, but not too helpful or effective. And he's being raised by alien gems from another planet, who are all identifying as women and femme, and have all kinds of close relationships since there is no other gender. It's just the women. So Steven is brought up in this super supportive, wonderful environment where he's free to explore lots of different things about himself. He's free to explore lots of different feelings. And in terms of talking about, well, what's queer about the show? It's like, well, what's not queer about the show? Because his mother, Rose Quartz, was actually in a relationship with her assistant, Pearl. Pearl is now raising Steven. Steven has very, very fond feelings for another young woman in the town, and they actually are able to combine into Stevani, which is basically like a non-binary character / giant woman. There is Garnet, my favorite character. Garnet is the production of another gem fusion. So a ruby and a sapphire accidentally fuse on their home world, and they are completely rebuffed. You know, it's seen as just not not cool for them to do that, but they discovered that they're more their true selves when they're together in fusion than anytime else. So you have this third individual who comes out of it named Garnet, and Garnet is arguably one of the best characters on the show. Later on, there was the super great episode where Ruby and Sapphire have like a little mock wedding to just sort of publicly announce their love. Steven is possibly the most wholesome, good-hearted character I have ever seen on any show or book. So he just goes wild with like, let's plan a wedding, let's celebrate love. If anybody who's watched the show knows that the soundtrack is fantastic. They have so many good songs on there, and those songs just explore all different kinds of love and why it's important and wholesome and normal. And it's just so incredibly affirming. It's certainly wildly popular. With now has a graphic novel series, which the library does carry. And I personally enjoy seeing all of the great cosplay that comes out of the Steven Universe fandom. There's a lot of really fantastic cosplay if you're a fan of cosplay.
One of my recent favorites is She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. It's on Netflix. Absolutely love it. And similar to Steven Universe, it's like, what about this isn't queer? It's just a very gay world. Like, and their characters represent like all different levels of, you know, attraction and identities. But even the characters that are like in seemingly straight relationships, whatever their identity is, like they're still like Bo and Seahawk are two guys in the show that at one point or another are in relationships with women, and even then they're still like destroying gender norms. So every aspect of it is just like a queer celebration. We've got examples of like healthy, lasting queer relationships. Bo has two dads who are just a lovely couple. And then two of the superhero princesses, Natasa and Spinnerella, they're a couple too. And one of, I think like the most significant LGBTQ plus affirming aspect of the show is it's the finale. So I want to be careful about spoilers. If you're like very sensitive and can like pull spoilers out of vague information, you might want to mute this, but I'll just say that like the climax and resolution of the show revolves around two women who love each other. And it's, watching it was like a huge rush of feelings for me. If you're not familiar, there's a trope in media, the like bury your gays or the dead lesbian trope. It's basically that like even if we have queer representation, they can't have a happy ending. It's carryover from the Hays Code way back in the day when like anyone who had immoral behavior wasn't like literally was not allowed to have a happy ending. And even after media moved past that specific code, it's still a trope that's carried on. So this moment, like it's not just a gay happy ending, as much as we love you know, the kiss at the end of Adventure Time. Like I felt like a step bigger than that. This was like that, you know, the power of love that we see in like at the end of Beauty and the Beast, or you know, these stories that are like a big part of our media culture. Like it was that kind of moment, except two women. And it was just I had so many feelings. It was a really impactful moment in the show that I'd never seen that kind of resolution in a show before. So very exciting. Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Mhm.
I remember after Steven Universe finished airing, one of my friends texted me something like Adventure Time crawled so that Steven Universe could fly or something like that. And basically it does really feel like the queer representation has really like, I mean, you can see like from Adventure Time where it's all subtext to Steven Universe, where it's a lot more in your face, to She-Ra, where just like the whole world is super queer. You can really see each one of them building on its predecessor. But my recent favorite is Owl House.
Yes.
Is a delightful animated show on Disney. There's this 14-year-old girl who she has this like weird sense of humor, and all of her class projects involve bringing snakes and spiders to school, and the principal is like, this is unacceptable. So her mom sends her to normal camp. But instead of actually going, Luce finds herself in this magical world through a portal that looks like an owl, that was opened by this witch lady. And she's like, oh, this is much better than normal camp. Instead of doing that, I'm going to learn how to be a witch. So Luce is like very like watching it. She's got like short hair. She's got like pins on her bags. Like I'm like, oh, like as a gay, I like see myself in this character. And in fact, later on, she expresses attraction to male characters, but later on in the series, she her relationship with this other female character, Amity, is explored, and they share a prom dance together.
Aw.
Yeah, so she's actually bisexual. And it's like it's I think the world as a whole is a lot less queer than Steven Universe and She-Ra, which I think is probably because it's a Disney show. But it kind of entered my radar when I saw that Molly Ostertag, who is Noelle Stevenson's wife, and Noelle Stevenson is the showrunner for She-Ra. Molly Ostertag worked on the Owl House, and I was like, oh, like if Molly Ostertag is involved, I know it's going to be gay. And the showrunner for Owl House, of course, I'm like blanking on her name, Dana something or other. She's bisexual as well, Dana Terrace. So it's got a queer team behind the scenes, kind of vouching for the representation.
Yeah, I love Molly Ostertag's graphic novel series, The Witch Boy, which is just this gender role smashing book. And his best friend has same-sex parents. And of course, Noelle Stevenson, her partner, wrote the Lumberjane series, which I am still obsessed with. It is such, again, good, wholesome content that is queer affirming. I do want to switch gears a little bit to talk about problematic representation that we may have seen in these types of shows. We might have seen straight washing, just straight up homophobia. You know, some of our younger viewers may not really understand what that means, but it does affect queer youth very negatively, and actually I would argue affects heterosexual youth very negatively as well. So where I have seen that, and I talked to Maria Vivar Guzman about this extensively in some of our anime viewers advisories is Sailor Moon. So Sailor Moon might be something that you watched when you were in kindergarten. For me, I was in high school, but I still got up early every day and watched Sailor Moon. And there's a lot of things that between the original series and when they re-released Sailor Moon Crystal and Sailor Moon S on Hulu, you kind of got to see the huge differences. So one of the major differences was that they had two queer characters, two of the Sailor Scouts, Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune. Instead of having them as being in a relationship, they kind of creepily changed it to their cousins, their relatives. And that's why they're so close, which I think is very inappropriate personally. Also, they have done gender swapping in the show where to code people as queer, they had them just change gender. So that way there was nothing you could say about same-sex attraction. And that was very disheartening. But, you know, I will say that you experience a lot of joy when you see the original story for what it is. And you're like, oh, I always kind of suspected that something was going on here. And now I know. But yeah, I'd love it, Teresa, if we could talk about any other types of misrepresentation you've seen.
Yeah, I wanted to take some time to talk about Disney because they are a huge cultural force in the stories that we grow up with, and they have a very controversial history with LGBTQ plus representation. There's a lot behind the scenes if you want to dive into it. I'm mostly going to talk about what's on screen though. So a good place to start is with the history of queer-coded villains. I know we talked about queer coding a bit, but if you're not familiar with the term, it's when a character has lots of signals of being queer, but it's never actually stated. So from the earliest feature films that Disney's been doing, like Snow White, there's been some recognizable queer coding with their villains. So there's a trope of having like an older woman who is has an obsession with some younger woman and is like interrupting some kind of heterosexual bliss. So we see that with Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, and also Cruella de Vil in 101 Dalmatians is like obsessed with, I forget her name, it's like Annie or something, but the woman who is one of the owners of the dogs. And then also along those lines, a lot of the male Disney villains are coded as being like dandies, which is historically a way to mark someone as queer without saying it. So we see that with like Scar or the Cat and the Fox in Pinocchio. Captain Hook is another one. An interesting thing about that, also, similar to the woman villains, they also frequently have an obsession with a younger male character. And both of those things are part of homophobic propaganda that presents gay people as being predatory towards younger people. And if we think about a especially relevant example of this would be with Shere Khan in the Jungle Book. He got remarkably more sinister than a lot of the other villains. And this was around the time that Disney was in talks with the FBI to create some homophobic propaganda about predatory homosexuals. So this villainization of queer people is deeply rooted in Disney's history. And some of it's carried over into their more recent movies too. Like Ursula is based on the drag queen Divine. Mm-hmm. An interesting example too is in Hercules, where there's a lot of queer activity in Greek myths, but Hercules is incredibly straight-washed. And then Hades, who is one of the few male gods who canonically does not have relationships with men, is incredibly queer coded in the Disney version. So yeah, there's a lot of discussion to be had around how problematic that is to always have the bad guy be presented as someone who isn't straight. But also on the other side of that is that the LGBTQ community has claimed a lot of those villains as something beloved. When you don't have a lot of representation and you get queer-coded villains who have these amazing musical numbers, it's great. It is a lot of fun to engage with that and to kind of adopt it as your own. So that brings us to an interesting aspect of like the live action remakes that we've had more recently, where they've, like Lion King, for example, they've removed the queer coding with Scar because, you know, it is problematic, even though we can enjoy Scar as a character too. But as they've removed some of the problematic representation, they haven't replaced it with positive representation. So that brings us to queer baiting. Queer baiting is when they'll like hype people up and be like, we're going to give you some representation, just wait and see. And then what they give you falls completely flat. And it's happened multiple times with Disney. Well, they'll be like, we're going to give you a lesbian couple in Finding Dory, and then they're just hidden in the background. Or with the live action remake of Beauty and the Beast, like, we're gonna give you a gay character, LeFou's gay, and the only time it shows up is for like 1 second in the finale. He like bumps into a guy while they're dancing and they look at each other. Like, that's the extent of it. And it just keeps happening. And they've had so many opportunities to step up and give us some actual representation. Elsa is incredibly queer coded in a positive way, but they're not willing to take the step and give her a girlfriend. Or like the live action remake of Mulan had so much potential to have lots of representation, whether it's, you know, bisexuality or being transgender, or like so many places where they could have leaned into it, and there was just nothing. So yeah, it's frustrating. It's exciting that Owl House, which is a Disney show, has some bisexual representation, but we're also very ready for it to be a princess or a prince, or really any other you know, feature film character.
Yeah, thank you so much for unpacking that, because you know, Disney has plenty of problematic issues. You know, recently Dumbo and the Aristocats, was the Aristocats? No, Lady and the Tramp, have like trigger warnings on them because they portray people in really racist ways. And it's unfortunate because Disney is beloved by so many people, particularly queer people. They have tons of like queer events at Disney World and things like that. So they're happy to take their money, but they're not necessarily happy to give them the content that they really deserve. Reed, did you want to talk about any problematic representation?
Yeah, so mostly what's been on my mind is the man in a dress trope, which is incredibly transphobic and incredibly pervasive in all media. But if you look at like cartoons especially, you'll see a couple of different like kinds of portrayal of if you see like a male character who's cross-dressing, there's like him from Powerpuff Girls who wears like high heels and is has a lot of really feminine mannerisms. He's a villain, and so that kind of intentionally or unintentionally, it trains the audience to be like, okay, somebody who has like conflicting gender presentation is evil. And then on the other hand, it's like it'll be the butt of a joke. So you know, you're trained to see a male character wearing a dress, and it's supposed to be funny. But in reality, this is like, it's training you to other, to have like a non-normalized reaction to people with conflicting gender presentation, who could just be like cisgender heterosexual people who are experimenting with what they want to wear. Or they could legitimately be transgender, non-binary individuals, who that is their gender. There's one particular example that comes to mind, is in SpongeBob, which I love that SpongeBob is confirmed asexual, but it's gone on for a long time. So there's some episodes that really haven't aged well. And there's this one episode where Patrick, SpongeBob's best friend, has to go into hiding, and he dresses up as a woman. And everybody is like, "Oh, who's this beautiful woman?" And they really are like interested, and some of them, I think, attracted to Patrick as a woman. And then when it's revealed at the end that he's Patrick, everyone is like really grossed out. And that's incredibly dangerous for
Yes.
the community. Trans women are murdered when it's people who are attracted to them find out that they're not cisgender women. And of course, trans women are women.
Mm-hmm.
But to somebody who is not educated on this matter, they see them as a man in a dress. So yeah, it's an incredibly harmful trope. And hopefully as a society, we're kind of moving away from that. And if you see someone with conflicting gender presentations, the correct reaction, rather than, "Oh, this person is evil," or "This is funny," is, "Oh, like, that's a nice dress," or like, "Oh, this is like a normal thing to see."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thank you so much for bringing that up, because it is something that actually affects us here in our county. It's very sad to say that over the past few years, young transgender women of color have been murdered at a rate that is disproportionate with their population and their representation. So yeah, it's going to be a lot more exciting to see people normalizing just not gendering your dress. It is very harmful, and it just kind of doesn't make sense because gender isn't a threat to anybody. So I would love to talk more about that. I know that we are running a little short on time. So I wanted to switch gears and talk about what we hope for the future of queer representation in youth media. Personally, I'd like to see more queer main characters, not just like the sidekick or the friend, which is very much what I experienced growing up in the 80s and 90s, was that if you had representation, it was like a side character who was just there to support the main character's, heterosexual love interest. So I'd like to see more queer characters in animated series so that people understand that, like, they're still the same people. They just, have different feelings than somebody, or they might just identify in a way that, destroys your gender binary that you've been brought up on it. And that is, again, it's no threat to anybody. I would particularly like to see more wholesome content, like Steven Universe, for example, versus problematic content. And what I mean by that is, because I see that sometimes juvenile and YA fiction can fall victim to this with a number of different marginalized groups. where they focus on like, I'm the fill in the blank person and I have fill in the blank problems. So I'm a queer person with queer person problems. Um, I'm tired of not being able to recommend something to young people who are truly just interested and open. That isn't something like with a heavy major problem. I mean, I think that we should just normalize wholesome content, because we are talking about young people and they deserve to be able to just enjoy good content. And I would say the last thing I would like to see more of is, this is sort of adjacent, is that it would be good to see more queer characters and storylines in video games. Um, some of them that are rated M for mature have some pretty open queer storylines, but video games are something that is an all ages thing. I know that Animal Crossing gave people different gender identity options, which is a huge step. Um, and then you have The Sims, which I used to play 15, 20 years ago. And I delighted in the fact that the game did not stop me from involving people in same-sex couples. So it would be great to see more of that. Or for example, like The Sims is still just this hugely popular franchise that a lot of people of all ages play. It would be great to see some different gender identities introduced. There have been so many versions, so many expansion packs. I mean, that would be that's a really simple ask, in my opinion.
Stardew Valley is another one that's appropriate for younger ages, and they do unfortunately still just have like a binary gender option at the beginning. I'm hoping an update will fix that soon, but you can be in relationships with people in your town, and no matter what gender you pick at the beginning, you can date anybody. So some of what I'd like to see in the future, I mean, I'm excited that things are becoming more normalized, that like even shows that aren't, where like the creators maybe aren't equipped to tell queer stories, they'll still have queer people existing in the world. And even though it's small, I do appreciate it. And I know Disney isn't the end all be all of storytelling by any means, and problems with the company aren't likely to change in a big way because they're so huge, but it would be really significant to finally have a queer main character in one of their movies, and I hope they get around to it soon.
What I'd like to see is mostly more trans characters, especially in children's shows. Like, I mean, in Steven Universe, we have Stevani, who's non-binary, but they're non-binary and intersex, but they're not, in a lot of episodes. In the end, Sadie had a partner who goes by they, them pronouns. But that's just like in one episode. She-Ra has Double Trouble, who is also non-binary. But I mean, I think that's it. Like, there's really like no trans representation in, I mean, on TV in general, but especially in children's TV shows. And I think, it's something that's going to happen. But, I want it to happen now. Because, I mean, if you look at queer audiences, I mean, it's a force. Like, Noelle Stevenson actually like leveraged the audience reaction to X and Y female characters, the relationship, to make it canonically textual on screen. Like, that's how she made it happen. She was like, from episode 1, audiences have picked up on this. And when it happened, there was like crazy media attention, and like so much like merchandise. And, you know, if you look at even like the 90s, like Xena Warrior Princess, which like didn't even have canonical lesbian, or I think it did actually. I never watched it. But the relationship between Xena and Gabrielle was not like textually romantic, but that's what people remember it for because it just had such a huge following in the lesbian community. And I think production studios are going to see that and see that like LGBTQ plus audiences have the media attention and the buying power that this is like a good financial decision.
Yeah.
You know, just from a pragmatic sense. But, you know, it can't happen soon enough.
I agree, particularly because, some people, if you are following the news, might be aware that trans youth are under attack right now. There are tons of bills in throughout the country that are trying to ban transgender athletes from competing in sports, which is so detrimental because youth sports is so important, and it's not about winning, it's about camaraderie and playing and learning to function as a team and staying physically active in a lifestyle where we're all pretty sedentary now. And then there's the denial of healthcare for transgender youth, which is, you would think would be criminal, but is not. So I agree with you, Ray. I think we need transgender representation now in youth media. I think we have just enough time not to do a book talk, but just to like throw out like, what's the best queer youth graphic novel you read this past year? So the one I'm going to mention is Snapdragon by Kat Lay. And this was literally the best book I read last year of any, age group or any kind of format. One of the things I loved about it is that it's the first kids graphic novel I've seen that has a Black trans girl as a primary character. And then also this incredibly sweet, so wholesome, I'm gonna die, relationship between two elderly women who are having an interracial relationship. And so you just think about the challenges of being Black and having this kind of relationship in the 50s or the 60s with somebody who is kind of butch and, having to stack that against like, well, do you want a family? Are we allowed to have a family? It's still very difficult for people to have their rainbow families. So anyway, go read Snapdragon. So good. Teresa, what's your number one pick?
So I had to pick one, so I'm gonna quickly name a couple. The Moonstruck series is absolutely precious. Lots of queer characters who are also like monsters or witches or different things like that. And they work in a coffee shop and they have magical adventures. Absolutely adorable and very fun. As the Crow Flies is a bit more of a serious note, but really, really good about a young lesbian girl who is Black attending a religious hiking trip where everyone else is white and trying to figure out how her identity fits with her own faith in an environment that's hostile in a number of ways. And also she forms a friendship with a trans girl who's on that same hike and is experiencing a lot of her own things as they go through that experience together. Really good. And then last, The Prince and the Dressmaker is precious, so precious. Story of a prince. They describe themselves in a way that sounds like gender fluid, could be a good identifier for them. And they hire a seamstress to design their fantasy wardrobe, and the two of them form a close relationship, and they go out on evening adventures, and it's a wonderful story. Also, I heard that Universal Pictures purchased the film rights, and there are talks that they're going to make it into a musical. I haven't seen any updates since last year, but I'm really, really excited about that project.
Stay tuned, folks. Maria, want to close us out with a recommendation?
Okay. Katie O'Neill is like in middle grade YA fiction, or not YA, middle grade graphic novels, is like an icon. So most recently I've read the Tea Dragon Society series, which has, it's absolutely precious. The art is adorable. It's got these little dragons that grow tea plants as like antlers. And if you drink the tea, it'll like give you a beautiful memory. And it's got a gay interspecies couple as recurring characters throughout the series. She's also written Aquacorn Cove and Princess Ever After, both of which are also very gay and absolutely delightful. Wonderful fantasy graphic novels. Cannot recommend enough.
And I just found out that there are plush tea dragons if you go to the publisher's website and look at their merchandise, and they're precious.
I really want one.
Thank you. Yeah, the Tea Dragon Society was a Black Eyed Susan book for graphic novels grades to 6 a few years ago. So they've done a great job at Black Eyed Susans of pushing queer representation in youth media. I just want to say thank you so much to both of you for your time, your expertise, and your insight. This was a really great conversation, and I hope we can maybe keep it going with another topic sometime soon. Thanks, everybody. Come see us at the library. Signing off from Prince George's County Memorial Library System.